combat your tiredness with some medical coding talk.
Bring it on.
So, Access Innovations, I'm just going to go through an extremely brief history here. There's a few historical slides and some sort of how it works. And I'm kind of going to gloss over a lot of this stuff because what I really want to do is tell the story of why doctors are always looking on their screens rather than doctoring you. Something that's becoming increasingly problematic. So there's a bunch of information in here, but it's not all going to be discussed heavily. So Access Innovations was founded, or Access Integrity was founded in 2011 by Margie and Jay and John Carance, who recently left our company, causing me to turn over. So we decided, they decided in their research that the clinician provider market would be the most lucrative. And over time, and you'll see the different integrations of this. We have multiple integrations into EHRs, electronic health records, including Athena Health and Allscripts, which are two of the top 10 EHR companies in the country. Oh, sorry, Margie. So how it works is it basically leverages the data harmony technology. It's an MAI call in the medical space, and instead of delivering concepts, it delivers hard and fast medical codes in the ICD-10, CPT, and HCPCS code sets. And so in order to do what we want to do, and that is return these codes, because ICD-10 is 67,000 codes, and so in order to make that in order to have that returned reasonably and accurately, we had to make relatively massive rule sets, including the 4.6 million lines of rules in ICD-10, which Dan was integral in making happen. So in all of this, we deliver highly relevant diagnosis and procedure coding suggestions, and then as you'll see in some of the other integrations, we also supply revenue cycle and dial management services, resources. So the point here is that we return highly relevant codes so that doctors get paid more and more accurately. So the problem here is that providers are required by clinic management to provide codes. They're not coders, and they're out of their element. So they make mistakes, they're slow, they're irritated, and so Maestro captures this, captures both the actual relevant codes, but also can recommend higher level codes that help doctors get paid more. And so, again, like it says, they want to be doctors. So it keeps them from having to code stuff, keeps them from providing the care that they know that they should deliver. So this is our most basic AI2 integration, which we call Access Integrity AI2. So this is medical claims compliance. This is my animation. Yeah. So in this, as you can see, it's a fairly simple interface. If you enter stuff into these fields, which are informational fields, we'll capture that information. But you copy and paste or upload a medical record, an encounter note, and search for call MAI. It's basically the same thing as any other MAI call. It takes the context from the medical record and returns a series of codes. And then the user, whether that's the provider, which in often cases more and more it is, billers and coders, they can then select those codes, they go down to the bottom, and then this can then be saved, and it's basically sort of like a log MAI type thing. And then you can search for codes under codes and descriptions and get the various returns and code sets. But again, this is pretty basic. It's and as you'll see here, it's very customizable, and so there's a lot of potential for this in and of itself. And so this is our first big integration. This is an integration with a company out of Utah called Find a Code, and this is called Codano. In this case, you're required to have a zip code because what Find a Code, one of the things that Find a Code delivers is this scrub functionality, and what that does is show it looks at where your zip code is. People get paid more. Healthcare is cheaper in Cheyenne than it is in Boston. So in order to have that, and so we show a bunch of information about, they're called relative value units, and they're how much you get paid for a certain, what would be procedural code. And that costs more in Boston than Cheyenne. So, and then we also have the book view, which is basically all that is doing is surfacing the hierarchy of the code set. Pretty simple. But it allows you to look at the codes around something. So in this case, and I know you can't read this, but this is unspecified injury of muscle. That's not a code that you can get paid off of. That makes no, there's no specificity. And so you can surface the taxonomy, look at what's around it, find a more appropriate code, and add it from there. So then, as a full integration, this is Integra code. This is what I am mostly trying to sell to clinics currently. So this is the full integration in the EHR. In this, all of the past stuff that I've said is the same. But in this case, you can search under particular code sets and then add from there. So take a step back. In the EHR, when the provider has to assign a code, and in one of our particular integrations, the search is MAD, just MAD. And so we made it so that if a provider put a code in, we say, yes, you put the code in, that's fine. But what we'll also do is recommend these higher level codes that they can then add from there. And what counts here, this is our line item for CPT. You add in the proper diagnosis, so whatever's over here is irrelevant. All that counts is what you put into that diagnosis field. And then what we can do from there, once you're satisfied, you can scrub it. This is a terribly coded note. We get these red X's. But then you can hit the charge button at the top right, and that takes the information that you selected, the diagnosis, the procedure, and pushes it into the EHR billing screen or charging screen, which takes them completely out of what they had to do previously, which was cut and paste. So we allow them, by using this, to skip an entire step in their process. So a little bit of ICD history here. So ICD-9 was adopted as standard in '79. The world started. Yes, Jay.
Define the acronym.
Oh, sorry. The International Classification of Diseases, 9th edition, was adopted as a standard in '79, and almost immediately countries started adopting it, but not us. We installed, and then finally, after some congressional weird stuff and timing, it became active on October 1st. So let's go back in time to 9/30 in 2015, and this is our friend Dr. Manley. Dr. Manley looks like a sleepy guy, but what's in his head? Something that looks kind of like this, right? So then he woke up, and kid gets bit by a turtle, has to go to the doctor. Doctor has to do his job, his or her job, and so there's really nothing that can be done about it. Have to use ICD-10. That's the standard now. So what we realized was that ICD-10 was never really the big issue. It was evaluation and management, which we'll look at really fast here. Evaluation and management is this extremely tiny subset of CPT, which is another code, which is a procedural code set. So I'm blanking on the name of it right now, sorry. But it's extremely important. It's such a small part of it, but it's extremely important because basically this is what determines how long you've spent with the patient, the thoroughness of the examination, and the level of risk associated with what you've done. So this is important because it determines how much a provider gets paid. And so just to explain real briefly, you've got a set of 5 codes, and those are representing 5 levels of evaluation and management. So the first, the level 1 pays you the least, level 5 pays you the most. If you overcode, you can trigger audits. If you undercode, you're at increased risk, which can also trigger an audit. So you're kind of getting it on both sides, and so a lot of times practices will just code one code every time, that's it, and they are losing themselves a ton of money. And we're talking thousands sometimes for certain procedures. And I have actually been told by multiple practices that they're at 30% accuracy on their E&M code. 30%. So we created a solution. This was a combination of myself and Winston and the folks at Find Code. We came up with what we wound up calling DHUG. And so it takes basically the same idea, but splits it out into the multiple ways in which evaluation and management is discussed, and that's examination, history, and risk and decision making. So there's 3 types of history, so that's why there are 5 thesauri. They cannot overlap, and that's really important. That's why we have to split them apart. So there's you hear it all the time. I do at least. If it's not in the documentation, it didn't happen. If you can't show you've done something, then you can't code for it. And so, let's have a look. So this is what the interface looks like. It's kind of a kludgy Photoshop job. Sorry about that. So what you see here, this is our final calculation, and we're recommending, in this case, that it's actually the highest level code. So where somebody might do level 2 because it's easy, we're actually saying there's documentation in here to go down and prove to a potential auditor that you've done what you've done. So even if it's wrong, you've got your documentation and have an argument. Down here at the bottom, you've got all your documentation, and then you can click on any places where it's written. It'll take you to that particular part. So anyway, well, what we're heading, so like it says here, E&M really revealed the risk, the issue of risk in the medical space. And so I'm not going to go through, I'm still learning these things, so I'm not going to go through what each one of them means, except to say that each one is a different factor in how audits happen, in how insurance companies pay, in how much doctors get paid. So to finish out, you go to the doctor, you like your doctor. You want them in business next year when you come in for your next medical examination. If they get one audit, likely they won't be there. So, anyway, any questions?
Do you do anything with LINK?
With what?
LINK?
No, not familiar.
Logical Object Identifier Naming Convention, Regenstein Institute in Indianapolis. They're working to harmonize medical language across the board.
L-O-I-N-K?
L-O-I-N-C.
L-O-I-N-C. I will look that up.
Because our informatics people do work with them also.
Okay.
Essentially, they're taking, we do it on our end with taking the radiology vocabulary, harmonizing it with theirs, and then also with the codes, so that literally everybody's on the same page.
That's fantastic.
And they do it with more than just us. I mean, they're doing it with whomever wants to.
Well, that makes this sing. The language, that's one of the big things about evaluation and management. The language is so subjective that it's really difficult to associate chest pain with, I don't know, doesn't matter. The language that gets associated with all of this stuff is so broad that it's extremely hard to write rules for. With ICD-10, not as hard. Still difficult because there's still plenty of ways that doctors talk, but much easier. But something like that would be brilliant for something.
Let's talk about it at dinner.
Yeah. Anything else? All right. Wayne?
Can you expand on how you took ICD-9 and turned it into ICD-10?
Sure. So ICD-9 was, I'm not remembering exactly how many codes, but it was like 7,000 or something like that.
17,000.
17,000, thank you. So it expanded with 10 from that 17,000 to 67,000. And so what we had to do was we had some crosswalks. A lot of this information came from Find a Code, or some of it came from Find a Code. And we built crosswalks, and then Dan programmatically built rules for each of the code descriptions. Yes, sir.
Can you define crosswalk?
So ICD-9 is, or ICD-9 had 3 options when it was coming to ICD-10. A 1-to-1 code match, a 1-to-0 code match, and a 1-to-many code match. Now, a lot of them were 1-to-many. This is how we expand so much. And so what we wound up having to do was, going through the analysis, the 1-to-ones are easy.
She's really excited.
That's hilarious. So the 1-to-0 codes are easy. You just go through and you delete them out. The 1-to-many codes are much more difficult because you have to distinguish what those differences now are. So in the case of Y59.21XA, bitten by turtle initial encounter, then there's also bitten by turtle, say that bite gets infected. That's a separate code. That's bitten by turtle sequelae. And so we had to differentiate from all of those.
That's a real code, by the way.
These are real codes. These are all real codes.
What does
everything-
sequela mean?
What's that?
Sequela?
That's
Subsequent visit.
it's not. So initial encounter is everything that happened. So this kid gets bitten by the turtle, right? Every piece of care that happens from the time that this kid is bit to the time that the thing is healed, that's the initial encounter. I learned this in a coding class. It's really weird terminology. But sequelae is anything that's weird that happens in the midst of that. So that hand gets infected, or necrosis sets in, poor kid.
Starts growing a shell.
And so therein lies the difference. So the thing about these crazy codes, just as an aside, there's a lot, especially when 10 was coming out, there was a lot of talk, a lot of funny blog posts about all the crazy codes that are in there. But factually, if we're going to capture what happens in the medical world, something like this is vital. ICD-9 didn't give us anything. It might have been easier to code, but it didn't give us anything in the way of analytics. So if I want to know how many kids have been bitten by turtles in public parks this year, I can look at age and the use of these codes and immediately pull out exactly how many times that happened. Yes,
How many times has that happened?
9,000. Exactly 9,000. Nope.
No. We're just filling time.
Yeah. Anything else?
Any other questions for Daryl? Okay, I think we're going to let you out of here a few minutes
No.
early.